thank everybody for coming to this section on communicating resilience. I think, as we heard from Christina just before this, the question of communication and people's engagement is critical in cities and in the whole question of responses to climate and the array of water issues that we all face. I'm Marcus Mensch, and I'm the founder of ICET, which has worked across South and Southeast Asia for now for about 18, 19 years, a lot on the water resource issues, a lot on the questions of climate. And I've been in and out of Stockholm for many years myself. I think this is probably the 25th year for me as well. If not, it's probably the 24th or 23rd. I know I came in the first few years. So you might ask, what are we trying to do here? You know, I have written many, many papers. I've written a lot of reports, led the groundwater review for India at one stage in the mid-90s, and felt that, you know, as a friend commented on a flight once, you know, that report is fascinating. It must be of interest to another emu. The idea being that so much of what we write ends up being read by very few people, that there's very little impact beyond the circles that we're in. I've heard today so much about people's frustration with the COP and the question of global negotiations. And I've seen a lot of the things. I think that what the Rockefeller Foundation is doing, for example, with city planning is fantastic. But city planning to me is like a rain cloud in the desert. You often can hear the thunder rolling and you see the lightning flashing and you see the structures, but the question is, does the rain hit the ground? And I think the critical question that a lot of us are facing when we look at climate change is, how do we catalyze real change? You know, yesterday, or the day before, when Rajinder Singh was talking about his projects, his programs, his influence, he mentioned the 7 rivers. And when he mentioned the 7 rivers, my wires went up. I've been in and out of South Asia for many years. And he was talking about the Saraswati. And the Saraswati is one of the rivers that's mentioned in the Vedas. It doesn't exist now. And what he's trying to do is tap into a very large social movement, the baseline of many, many people who are Hindus throughout the world, and tap into things that are deeply meaningful to them. He also took us all on a walk out to City Hall to look. That, again, was a padayatra, a trip, you know, very short in this case, but the idea being, let us connect with our local surroundings. And so I have also been seeking pathways. And the core pathway that I've been questioning has been, can we use different methods for engaging people, for inspiration? And to me, a lot of art is a pathway. A lot of narrative is a pathway. And the question is, can we create inspiration? Can we create vision? Can we create understanding? Can we create engagement? You know, this to me is better than peer review if you can get a lot of people working it. This right now is being streamed. We have no idea how many people are watching this relative to watching, for example, The King and the other show that's going on. But we are all seeking pathways, and I think whether it is what the Rockefeller Foundation is doing, whether it's what Rajinder Singh is doing, whether it's the reports that I did and the World Bank things, these are all parts of a solution. There are thousands of 1% solutions, and they each appeal to very different groups of agents. Most of the reports we write go to governments, to the hierarchies, to those who are in a position to implement. But so much of what I see happening on the ground is done by individuals, by people who own their own houses, who are responding to floods. They're the individualists. And it is them to whom I would like to speak often, to inspire. Because I think 90% of our attention goes to global frameworks, goes to planning, And yet 90% of the response to water scarcity, to floods, to climate change is going to be behavioral. So we need to have a pathway to communicate with them, to inspire, and for them to communicate with us, because their insights, their behaviors are absolutely essential. What we heard yesterday in this ION Asia, there was a question. Somebody said, where do you think the innovations are happening? And he said, my guess, based on large surveys, is that there's less than a 1% chance that anybody in this dialogue knows where those innovations are happening. That it is from different places, in business, in industry, in communities, that those innovations are happening. And if we want those to influence the global processes, they have to come up. I heard another one. I was in the one on groundwater yesterday. And I have a long history working on groundwater, as some people know here. And I was being lectured by a very kindly member of the government of India about how when intense rains fall, there can be very little infiltration, and the water runs off, and it doesn't contribute to recharge, so it doesn't reach a usable state. And yet what was interesting to me is I was in Boulder, and I was trained in the same hydrology. I went to Berkeley. We had, in 3 days, 2 years ago, practically our entire annual rainfall. And you know where our biggest economic impact was, and also our biggest benefit, is the groundwater bounced back. That flooded a lot of the basements. It flooded a lot of other things. It caused a lot of losses, but it's meant that we have had green years. So the whole question of the pathway to groundwater, how is that water getting in? I was inspired listening to Deepak Giwale talking about the mountain recharge sites or the mountain ponds and how those might rejuvenate the springs. It is actually a pathway into the groundwater. And it is knowing that there are these different ones and that perhaps some of the things that we've learned of standard things, that infiltration is at a given rate, actually don't hold true. We don't understand that as well as we might. So the idea here is to use art to create vision, to help people be inspired, to have question their own understanding, to deepen it, and to help us identify and surface those 1,001% solutions where I believe the future lies. If we don't have that and we don't engage people, we probably will miss many of the solutions. So this is part of something that's called the Resilience Narrative Project. It has a series of products here, you'll find. There's substantive writing, and there's a bunch of publications, which I hope people will take as they go. Cases, there's going to be a very in-depth working paper looking at this notion of resilience and what works, what doesn't, because we've seen some places where very resilient systems are also highly inequitable, or where resilience contributes to the perpetuation of structures that are perhaps not desirable environmentally in other ways. So it is deepening this question of resilience, and this is exploring it. So there are cases, working papers, publications. There are also videos talking with and interviewing people, interviewing Kunda Dixit in Nepal, talking about the Nepal water situation, making parallels between that and what causes communities to come together in my own hometown of Boulder, looking at what's happening in Gorakhpur in India. And then we've been also using games, places where people can develop and pull their own ideas together and locate themselves in the games. And then the question of the art that you see here. These are narrative wheels, and I'm incredibly proud to collaborate with my brother, as it turns out, who is the ceramic artist in this. But clay is a very immobile thing. It's part of, it's written in stone, shall we say, the images. But one of the things that's beautiful about what he has been doing is creating these narrative wheels that move. They turn, and I encourage everybody to engage with them. They tell a story in doing it, and they talk about this tension between the static nature of things that we have and the ability to adapt and move and to re-envision things. And we've had tremendous response to them in many places where people are used to them, can pull their own ideas out, can untangle the complexity. Many people are disempowered by the sense of climate, by the sense of complexity, by the sense of this huge thing. They can't locate themselves and there's the solutions in them. But when you look at many of these things, they portray that complexity. But they also show the numerous things that can happen that create a vision, where in a threat we have unsustainable practices, we have numerous things happening in a threat wheel, but in a more optimistic, a resilience wheel, where 1,001 little things like raising houses, like recharging groundwater, like transforming electrical utilities, all these things where each of us can do something and it adds up as 1% solutions, those make a difference. And it is the idea that those can aggregate and transform something as static as clay that I think can be very inspiring. And we've seen this, I don't know, here I'm among my tribe, the people I work with, the people who know the dialogue. But this has been something where when we've set it up, it's been the food service workers. It's been the security guards coming up. There was, at one conference we were at, there was a leader of the environmental justice movement, almost blind, coming up and putting his hands on these things and being able to tell and talk a little bit about the stories that are there. So this is why I see this as so important. It's a substantive thing. Michelle will be kicking off here a Twitter campaign that we have about what resilience means. And the idea is not to have some polite, it's another of those critical foundational concepts. We all know that. But the question is, what in practice does it mean? What are the pieces that build it? How do elements of this relate to the different behavioral groups in society? Those people who have voice, those people who have the ability to control budgets and sit in the government organizations, those people who act individually. That's what I think is so important about this and where we can begin to build the 1,001% solutions. So this, after an introduction and a talk by my brother on where his inspiration came from, and Michelle on some of these other things, then we'll begin to turn it over to the audience, engage individuals and say, what do you see out of this? Does this inspire you? Are there ideas that come to the fore? If so, put them in Twitter or in the tradition of the Tibetan prayer wheels. There are cards. They can be written and put inside. And we found in many places that the act of physically writing it down, putting it inside, having it there as part of the permanent exhibition becomes very meaningful. And all those will get also recorded and put out more broadly. So Chris, I invite you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. And thank you to ISET for bringing my work into this incredible venue. And thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation also for enabling me to be here and to bring my artwork. I'm a bit of a fish out of water, really, here. I'm not in the international development aid water world. I live in a small city in Bellingham, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. And I work as an artist. I'm a potter. And I've been doing these clay sculptures now, the prayer wheels, since 2000. I also serve as a board member for our local conservation land trust, which over the years has protected some 20,000 acres in the county I live in, to try to preserve some of the ecosystem functions and to create parks in an area that is rapidly developing, not developing in any kind of the overpopulated and very dire way that some of the cities that I've heard discussed through the last several days. But it's all human impact, and human impact on ecosystems that are pretty much overwhelmed all over the world. And it's frankly pretty scary as an individual who loves the beauty of this earth and wants to see my grandchildren grow up in it and enjoy it in the same way that the rest of us have so far. You might be looking at these prayer wheels and thinking about your own professional lives and thinking, boy, I need a big heavy piece of ceramics the way a fish needs a bicycle. And I guess I would say that put aside that judgment for a little while, and remember that fish actually do need bicycles if that bicycle replaces a polluting vehicle. They're not going to ride them. They're going to just appreciate them not being something more poisonous. So my first prayer wheel came out of a response to sorry, I got to get the right picture here, to a huge disaster in the city of Bellingham. It took place in a beautiful park where much of the population goes to celebrate their connection with the natural world, to walk in the forest, to go and find God, as my wife likes to say. In this case, it's an acronym for go outdoors. Neither of us are particularly religious people. We find our solace in the natural world and inspiration there. And this park is bisected by a beautiful creek that flows out of Lake Whatcom, which also functions as the water supply for Bellingham. And going at a 90-degree angle to the creek is a large gasoline transport pipeline that runs from the oil refineries north of the city, several hundred miles south as far as Portland, Oregon. And this gasoline pipeline also crosses the city water main. And some years before this disaster happened, there had been some work being done on the water main by a contractor with a backhoe, and they just bumped the gasoline pipeline a little bit, which weakened it in place. So that in 1999, in June, when a valve farther south on the pipeline was closed for some reason by the computer operating system located in a city farther to the south, that closing valve sent a shock wave up the pipeline through the gasoline that eventually came to the weak part in the metal on the pipeline and ruptured. And then the human operator overrode the computer, which the computer had sensed the drop in pressure in the pipeline, and the human operator overrode that computer, turned the pipeline back on, and it proceeded to dump 250,000 gallons of gasoline. Into the creek, which then covered the creek for about a mile, 6 inches deep in gasoline, and then it ignited and created this mushroom cloud over the city, took the lives of 3 young people, and generally traumatized the entire area and destroyed the habitat in the creek, which had been something that the community in Bellingham had been nurturing for years to try to preserve the salmon runs that would return every year and were celebrated as, well, for their wonderful food source and also as a sign of our stewardship of the natural environment there. The salmon, for those of you who don't know the North Pacific coast, are endemic to that region, much as they are to the North Atlantic, and they've been under a lot of stress lately. And so we really try to cultivate the wild stocks. As an artist, I was just working as a potter, and I was making all kinds of bowls and mugs and the sort of things that most potters are known for. And I found myself wondering, what can I do in response to this horrific disaster? And I came up with the idea of making a vessel that told the story in an illustrated narrative around the outside, put it on a turntable. That way you engage people physically in turning the vessel in order to read the narrative graphic, and as an empty vessel, it can be filled with people's responses in a written form. And so it would hopefully serve in some kind of therapeutic fashion for the community and preserve the memory of what had happened. Because my concern initially in observing and experiencing this pipeline disaster was that it would simply be forgotten in the next news cycle when some disaster someplace else in the world occurred. And no response really would take place in terms of changing regulation or improvement in our situation in relation to our energy source. And so I wasn't thinking of it as a prayer wheel per se. Like I said, I was not a particularly religious person, and although my brother referred to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition with these prayer wheels, I didn't know about that tradition at the time. I got my inspiration from a pre-Columbian Mayan sculpture that I saw that was a simple cylinder with a graphically depicted story on the outside. And I made that first piece and thought of the ideas that people would write and put inside as really expressions of their highest hope, their dreams, their aspirations, the kind of world that they would like to see created. And that's what happened. This piece was installed in a local park, and it received a lot of written things. And then later I made a 10-year anniversary of the pipeline disaster, which also documented the restoration work that had gone on the creek. And that is now located in the City Hall in Bellingham, where it continues to remind our representatives on the City Council and the Mayor that they're responsible really for the stewardship of the whole community of the city, not just the people, but the ecosystem that we all depend on. So that's where I'm coming from, and I would say that the salmon have come back to Whatcom Creek, and that's a point of great celebration for us. Last winter, my brother asked me to try to depict the global situation in regard to resilience and climate change on two wheels. One wheel, a depiction of the threat that we're all facing, and on the other, a vision of some kind of hopeful future. And this was in preparation for the National Adaptation Forum that took place in St. Louis last May. And we went and presented those two wheels there and got, as Marcus described, quite a wonderful reaction, and decided to bring them here with the addition of this water wheel, which is the central piece here. So I would simply ask that you take a moment and reflect on your own stories of what resilience means. I don't mean dictionary definitions. I mean, what's your experience of resilience? What have you actually seen? A resilience which not only, like, say, North Korea, which you could say resilience is in their nuclear weapons or in the size of their army. That's resilience for whom and is perhaps destructive. But resilience in a way that recognizes that we all share the planet together, not just as humans, but as a global ecosystem. And that's what I'm trying to get at. I know that there are places where there's a debate as to whether or not it's worth trying to preserve the ecosystem because the human need is so great. But that's a no-win situation in the long run, obviously. And so we have to think about the larger biosphere. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Michelle, and thank you for listening and being here.
Before I get on stage, I just want to quickly demonstrate how beautifully these wheels do turn. And it's a beautiful interaction of just watching the stories unfold. And every single time that I look at the wheels, I see something new. And so I hope that during the session, as I'm talking, it is not a distraction to me at all if you all want to come up and turn the wheels. And we have the postcards on the tables for you to write down your thoughts of what resilience means. So thank you all for being here this morning. This is my first World Water Week. Is there anyone else who's a newbie to this forum? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'm not alone. I know that Marcus is a veteran of the event. Are there any veterans that have been attending World Water Week since the 1990s? Raise your hand. So a good number, a really good number. That's exciting just to see the turnout that's here today. So I'm Michelle Fox. I'm the Director of Art and Communications at ISET International. And 2 years ago, we started on this Resilience Narratives project with funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. We didn't really know what we were going to do exactly, but we knew that we wanted to tell the story in a different way. As Marcus mentioned earlier, we've produced a series of working papers. We've done a lot of research. We've visited locations. We've done lit reviews. We've interviewed experts from around the world. One of the most awakening interviews that I had was with Kunda Dixit, the editor of the Nepali Times. We visited his house in Kathmandu, where he's installed rainwater harvesting systems and solar panels. And we had the camera set up, and my colleague and I, Ganmani Venkateshwaran, and I were interviewing him. And we asked him the question, in recent memory, has there been an event, a shock to the system, or a disaster where these systems that you've installed came to the aid of you and your family? And Kunda looks at me and he says, Michelle, every day is a disaster. Every day in Kathmandu is a disaster because we don't have access to potable water and we encounter power outages for several hours daily. And to me, this was an awakening moment because we talk about these resilient systems and we want to encourage resilience on an urban scale, but here we have a very resilient system that's incredibly undesirable. It's incredibly inequitable, and only for the people who own their houses or can pay water tankers to come and deliver gallons of water to their homes and families have access to a basic human need. After we met with Kunda, we went down to Gorakhpur, India, to visit with the Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group, a close partner of ISET International. And there we saw how we've applied this idea of resilience and resilience planning and really embraced it to create positive change in communities. There, situated between two major rivers, Gorakhpur encounters flooding events quite often on an annual basis, and this has brought and supported a rich agricultural economy. But with urbanization and ground sealing, the water has nowhere to go. And so rather than working in the city system, in the city boundaries, ISET International and Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group look to see on the periphery of the city that there are farming communities. So we engaged with them. We brought information to them and new farming practices. And through this engagement, we've increased the flood holding capacity of Gorakhpur, India, but we're also improving the livelihoods of these low-income farmers. And with an improved livelihood, they see increased profits, they're able to save money, and then reinvest it in their communities, their homes, and their children, sending their children to school. And this creates very short-term solutions with long-term impacts. And this program is allowing for the communities to increase the potential of their families to become more resilient in the future. So what we did was try to pack all of that into very short documentaries. So we have a series of short films that talk about these ideas in bite-sized chunks. We've also created a workshop that uses games to engage with people, diverse stakeholders, around these complex ideas. So how do you communicate complexity? How do you engage with people in a way that encourages them to share their knowledge with each other and build that knowledge as a community instead of just one person like me right now talking at all of you? So here you can see somebody throwing a ball of yarn, and this game is there to show people quickly the value of inclusivity, of equity, of access, and social networks, and how important it is for all of us to work across silos, to find ways to communicate across cultural boundaries, political boundaries, and disciplinary boundaries, find new ways to connect with one another, to share our ideas and thinking. Down below, you see resilience means. So we've created a diverse portfolio of products and materials to catalyze conversation, to get you to share with us and with one another what your ideas and solutions are for change, what your hope is, in recognizing the threat that we face with these globalized, centralized systems of climate change, of water scarcity and resource management. But then taking that and focusing it on the hope. What is the vision for a resilient future? And so today we're excited to launch this Resilience Means campaign. We have support from the Rockefeller Foundation, 100 Resilient Cities, the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication, and the Environmental Performance Index, and lastly, our friends at Climate Voices in Boulder, Colorado. This campaign is part of our mixed media integrated conversation on resilience. And our hope is that all of you, with the postcards that are on the tables right now, on the back, if you would write down what the hope is, what are the solutions, and what are your stories of resilience. And what you do is you come up, you lift the lid, and you drop it inside the wheel. But a lot of our products are experiential. They're designed for you to engage with us directly and engage with one another, but we don't want for that conversation just to stay in this room. We want to invite more people into it. And so with this Resilience Means conversation, we want to share these stories, the notes that you write on the cards, with our friends through social media, and allow them to engage with the artwork as well, allow them to join the conversation. Because ultimately, all of us have the power, we all have the ideas, and we have the solutions to create positive change in our world today. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to call on Fawad, who's been looking at a lot of these things directly on the ground in Pakistan. And tell us what you see here, how it relates to some of the things that are there.
Thank you, Marcus. So this is new to me also. Like Marcus, I worked on water issues for a long time. I was in the World Bank for 5 years, planned and designed and implemented large investments, went to many global workshops, and with the hope, the situation would get better. And time again, every few years, when I go to another big global, either climate or a water conference, I see that the problem has been partially solved, but bigger problems have evolved. Every time you go, there are more people without water, there are more people suffering because of climate change now. And like Michelle said, we do have the solutions, we do have the science, we worked very hard, but somehow it's not taking effect. So this is one way of, and a lot of people say maybe that's because we are unable to communicate. We are in a siloed little community of experts that work together, who understand the language, who understand the problem, but we're not reaching out to the people who are part of the problem and the solution. So I'll just give you one of my stories of some of the research we did in Pakistan and looking at how people, and it's a good story, on how people can become resilient and can become self-reliant and not be threatened by nature as much. So that story is also in here, in this problem wheel. So this is a photograph of a northwest corner of Pakistan, a very beautiful place called Chitral, with pristine waters and idyllic sort of a scenery. But there are big problems here. The problems are that there are forests on these mountains, and a lot of people who live there depend on those forests. There's very little agricultural land in this big valley here. Everybody else who lives up in the mountains don't have access to much food production through agriculture. So forest is the only means. But as this wheel shows here, the forests are being cut down. And there are two reasons for that. One reason is that there's demand for timber. There's a demand for energy. But then as we went and looked at these communities, there was another reason. The reason was because of climate change probably and increased flooding, their flash floods and their houses and the small plots they have for agriculture get destroyed. And what they need is some cash then. There's very little cash in these economies. They need cash to rebuild their houses, to rebuild their livelihoods. And to get that cash, the only way that they can interact with the market is to sell the forest. They have royalty. They own the forest. So with the government, they do felling in a certain plot. The wood gets sold. The forest department takes some of the profits and shares the royalty with the people who rebuild their house. But after some time, they realized with the increasing population that this was becoming a vicious cycle. Every time the houses would get destroyed, the trees would get cut down, they get rebuilt, but you've created a vulnerability upstream. So next time when the big rains came, 6 years later, 10 years later, the flood was even bigger. And there was no way out of the situation. So that is where our problem wheel is. So this is one of the communities that lives up there. As I was researching these communities, we did a lot of surveys. Actually, there's a peer-reviewed publication out on this already, but that's not how I'm going to tell the story this time. Up at the end of one of the valleys, I see this, and I was surprised. And this is, something you've seen before, but I was surprised because this is a community of lumberjacks where people have only one pair of clothing, usually. And they would repair it, and they'll patch it every time until it gets completely worn out, and maybe once a year they'll buy a new pair of clothes. And look at these children. They're wearing really nice clothes. They have nice bags. They're going to school. They're wearing a uniform, for God's sake. I mean, they have different clothes to go to school. Now, what is wrong here? Actually, the question is what is right here? What happened here? This is the very last village in that valley. It only has one growing season, like most of the north here. Most of the valleys at the bottom have two growing seasons. So there is, the food scarcity is twice as much. So this inspired me to go there and find out what happened. I went there and got their story. It turns out that a very sort of energized leader there in the community once decided that he was in his water mill where they grind their grains. He wanted to install a motor and create electricity. He convinced some people to do that, and then once they had electricity, all of a sudden they realized that the public school that they had there, finally some teacher agreed to live there because this was the only village that had electricity. So all of a sudden education started coming in. And then the post decided that the post office could also be built there because they have electricity, so they have communication systems. And slowly, the health department also decided that they can have a basic health unit because they can store the vaccines there because this village has electricity. And within a cycle of 10 to 12 years, the kids got educated. Now, another problem that this village had was that they spoke a different language. They're in a very remote part of the country, so most people didn't speak the language of the rest of the country. And with this new education, which is not really education, it was more of communication, they started, every child, every girl, every boy was speaking the local language of the country, which is Urdu. And slowly they started out-migrating. Now they're communicating with the rest of the country, they're out-migrating, they went into the cities and started getting jobs. And with that, they started getting cash incomes. And when they started getting cash incomes, they didn't have to rely on selling the wood anymore. And so they put a ban on cutting down wood. And this actually caught on like wildfire, and the village below, and then the village below, and then the village below started putting up their own renewable energy, small microhydral systems. And there are about more than 200 right now in this region. And this story started about 12 years back or 15 years back. So 2002, 2003 is when this happened. And there's a big transformation. The forests are slowly coming back. we were looking at water policies and forest policies and how to change this. But none of the water policies and the 12 iterations of forest policy could bring about this change. The change came from the people. So what is resilience is a big question for me. Is it the electricity? Is it the forest policy, or is it the water policy? Or is it the ability to earn your cash income from an alternative, non-sort of climate, weather, nature-dependent source? I don't know. It's probably one of each of these. And I was a water specialist, so I was very interested in water, and it turned out in this story that water was causing the destruction, but it became a resource, and when it became a resource, then it actually started help build back not just the environment, but also the social system there. So I think, that was a very, very peculiar story, and I think each village, each region is different. So what is resilience in each place is probably a different story. And there are a lot of those stories that are right here that we can see, the geographically different, socially different stories. Now I'll just bring this all back and say, so we were talking about resilient cities. What does this have to do with that? And we are at a water conference. What does that have to do with that? The cities are where these people found their livelihoods. The cities don't function on their own. Cities need people. Cities need labor. Cities are run by humans. And these are the humans which are going to go and feed and run our future cities. What happened with the water? We thought water was very important, especially drinking water. It turns out this place has beautiful water. It has spring water. Everybody gets good water. And so water was not an issue in building their resilience. It was not a problem. It was actually a part of the solution. But we did the same research down the Indus in 4 other spots, and we realized people who did not have good drinking water were having a very hard time recovering from disasters. The year this research was done, in 2010, a huge flood hit Pakistan. This community, as expected, bounced back very fast because they had cash transfers. They rebuilt their houses. They didn't have to cut forests. They were back the next year. But downstream in places where we saw people who did not have good quality drinking water, took years and years to recover. And those who had hand pumps or some source of clean drinking water before the floods hit were more diversified, had more resources, and it had nothing to do with how rich or poor they were. They had more opportunities to build back their lives. So this was my little story that I wanted to communicate, and you can see etched into these beautiful pieces of art.
Thank you, Fawad. Now we come to a section which I should have this at the moment, will hopefully be more interactive. One of the key things in the ideas in these wheels has been to show that complexity, but also the simplicity. Each of these, the 2 main ones, is its tree shape. And the stems of the tree show the complex systems on which we depend, water, power, etc. The base around here has many of the practical examples of what people can do, whether it's different agriculture, whether it's rooftop rainwater harvesting, whether it's villages raised out of flood-prone areas, whether it's cities that are larger, that are capable of living with floods, of living with sea level rise. And here, in What's the Threat, it shows a very similar thing, except a difference in emphasis. It's the same systems, but it's the fear of falling that I think many people feel throughout the world, that sense of falling, that the systems that we stand on are fragile. And I would bet many Chinese looking at the stock market in the last few days are feeling a fear of falling as the economy ripples outward through us and hits many of us. So it is not a transformation completely of the systems, but it is talking about how those relate from a ground level into the different parts of the world. And at this point, what I would like to do is invite Deepak Giwale to come up. He hasn't looked at these in detail. I would like him to come up, take a look, and give a few thoughts. Tell us, does this inspire? Is this, full of bullshit? Is this another piece of cute art? Or is this stuff that actually could help us create visions and communicate in different ways. Deepak.
Thank you, Marcus. You know, when I was reflecting on this session, my own thought went back to the earthquake we had recently in Nepal, in Kathmandu. Well, we had one 3 days back at 5 point something, an aftershock.
So if you, the lighting is better on the stage. Is what.
And we're continuing with aftershocks. I think we have reached about 400 by now, above 4 Richter, or whatever scale they call it. But there were 3 big ones, 25th of April, 26th, and the Tuesday following that, 10 days later. Now, what is amazing is essentially we don't have a government. And our government only responded about, a week later? And that too, interesting that Narendra Modi had called a cabinet meeting in Delhi within 2 hours of the Nepal earthquake, and his plane had already landed in Kathmandu before the Home Minister even responded to anybody's phone call, our own Home Minister. Now, so resilience, when we talk about resilience, yes, if there's a good government, that's a lottery. That's good. But what happens in Kathmandu, the Government Commission for Rehabilitation, I think they've only barely now managed to put in a chairman, but the chairman has a double duty as a vice chairman of the Planning Commission. So how is he going to divide his duties between 2 important portfolios? We don't know. They haven't managed to nominate any of the other members of this rehabilitation committee. The donor aid that has been promised is still sitting there somewhere because the government itself hasn't formed all this committee and everything that is to go there. But what do you think is happening? People are responding, community by community, office by office, and helping in any which way they can. And what was most amazing about what happened in Nepal recently was how young people just self-mobilized. We had never seen something like that before. It was an amazing mobilization. Just in front of my own house is a school. The school is damaged. You can't use that school now. And local youth got together. It's a core part of Patan, Kathmandu. And local youth got together, set up tents, set up, plastic sheets, whatever, brought big pots and pans from, wherever they could find it, collected food, and were cooking food and helping people who had been displaced because their houses were gone, And this went on for, a month. Nobody asked them to do it, So this massive community mobilization that took place, which nobody expected, nobody, even everyday Nepalis in the same locality were surprised how well this happened. And rescue worker, I think it was an American I talked to, who had worked before in Haiti when that big earthquake took place, said something amazing. He said, this is really amazing here in Nepal, such a big earthquake, so much damage. In other places around the world where I've been after a disaster, within 2 days there are armed gangs going around looting. Nothing of that sort happened in Nepal. And not because our police was more effective or anything like that. It's just that the community was so there, So, when I was reflecting what is resilience, and I just put this down in my card, and I'll just like to read it, because that's what I think, resilience is, Beyond individual bank and asset balance, beyond well-functioning and responsive government, beyond all international goodwill that may not, or may but be delayed beyond usefulness come about. Resilience is the confidence, that inexpressible confidence that when the unplannable, unexpected happens, the neighbor, the acquaintance you had not seen for over a decade, the colleague whose own family might also have suffered a loss, all show up to help you. So that build-up of that intangible, I think is what art is trying to express. And it's the ability to speak beyond time. 10 years, 20 years later, suddenly you see, well, people give it funny names like social capital or something. I don't like those expressions. You use economic expressions, you get trapped in that logic. But there's something to art that hits something deep inside, that stays there, that transcends time, that goes beyond everyday memory, but then is there, to extend a helping hand in the dark. That, I think, is resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. Yeah, let me be resilient, and let me move this down, since we will have that, and I will move a wheel up, because being resilient, we don't, and as you say, we don't want to stand in the dark. Down below, we have been informed that the light is very bad. Bring the water wheel on up. So let us put it where it can be seen and where other people can see it and interact and put things in as well. The idea of these is not to be static. It's something to engage with and something to take a look at. So yes, put it in there. This will then get sent out and part of the conversation, but it is the physical and the tangible. Take a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now what we would like to do is see if we have volunteers, people. This is an interactive session. It's not for us to stand here and talk. Do we have volunteers who would be willing to come up and take a look at this and see, are there pieces in this that tell you something or that give you an idea and that you think is worth communicating around this? People sitting quietly. Ravi. The microphone? Oh, good. Oh, we can put that back up here. Come on up. And if possible, add in whatever is a specific element, story of your own. They're not delicate, even though they're ceramics.
Well, I just, as a neighbor of Deepak in India, we've been following the earthquake and the example. And what art can do is it can capture the intangible, the small, and the enduring over the immediate. So, just to give you an example, 24/7, news coverage from India was all about, in a sense, a sort of kind of triumphalism. How India, the great power, rushed to the help of its neighbor, and you had these television anchors going around, sort of ambulance chasing, some of them, not all of them. But what art in the small narrative, art as beautiful pieces of pottery like this, but art as everyday stories, art as things that you put on the Twitter, art as even myth and legend, actually represents a triumph of hope over despair. Yesterday, somebody was talking about rubbishing the romance of the community. But art restores the romance in the sense of not an empty set of vacuous thinking, but romance as a driver of human endeavor and hope. So I think this represents the triumph of hope over despair.
Thank you, Ravi. And that, to me, is one of the key things that we're trying to get going. So many people, when we put things out initially, talk about climate change. They talk about the water problems. They talk about poverty. They have this fear of falling. And that is the triumph of despair, the fear of falling. The idea of a lot of the art here is, Can you locate something specific that you can do? Can you locate those 1% solutions? And that is also where art can inspire practical action, where you can see yourself in conjunction and in relationship to the larger things and see where the value that you add falls, whether it be in the community conversations at the global level, which are depicted here, the COP, things like that, or in the day-to-day things, water harvesting, building a building that rises above the floods. It is that fact that people have an action space in their own houses. Most people have that and can do something practical. That's, to me, where you get the inspiration, and where instead of saying, all I can do is this, you say, actually, I can contribute this. It's 1% of an overall solution. Is there anybody else I can encourage to come up here and take a look at these? Please come. The microphone is up there as well. Good.
My name is Dhruv. I'm from India. The gentleman mentioned about the Nepal earthquake and the talk about the youth. And from my university, I'm coming from the Sept University, which is an architecture college. And our all gang of architecture students used to visit the Nepal and the bunch of sheets you mentioned about. And because we have a good network of friends because we have a good architecture friends in Nepal, they have mobilized us to visit to them, and so we also participate in that way. But in 2001, when we had a earthquake in Gujarat, when the Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, then the earlier Chief Minister of Gujarat, and perhaps he learns from our respond to the natural disaster, that they converted to the people's participation is the way we convert the natural disaster into the opportunity. So this is for me, the resilience means when the natural disasters comes to the us, and we converted that disaster into the opportunity. That is for us, the resilience to the cities.
That is great. Add that and put yours in if you can. And one of the things I would say is on this, as opposed to the more threat wheel, if you look here, this shows a lot of community, whether it's at the global or in the local regions at the local level. Whereas here, in a lot of the threat, what you see is everybody under their own flag, everybody separate. So this is actually, a lot of this art is trying to capture the realities, the actual tangible things. It's not just pretty pictures. It's actually capturing and related to the basic science, how we organize, how the climate system responds, the complex systems. Is there anybody else I can encourage up to come up and add to this? Please do.
Hello. My name is Heather Murdoch. I'm a junior civil engineer from Canada. And I'm just about to start a master's program in flood risk management. And the conversation here today and the conversation about some of the cases in Pakistan and India made me think about some of the flooding issues that we've had in Canada in a few of our cities over the past few years, such as Calgary and Toronto in 2012 had major floods. And I think what's important is how we react to them, that we don't make the same mistakes again. And Toronto actually had a really big flood in 1954. It's called Hurricane Hazel. And in response to that, Ontario created the conservation authorities to actually manage water and flooding on a watershed basis. And different regions have responded in different ways. But I think it's really important that we learn from them, that we don't make the same mistakes again, and that we manage our watersheds in a responsible way. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for adding that in. And that is, thank you. Yeah, that's a key part. One of the things that is present in the more description of resilience in the wheels, and in a playful way, we have to live and we have to play to enjoy, is actually right in here. It's all about learning. It's all about studying the resource system, knowing, adding information. That's a critical piece. Is there anyone else who I can encourage up? Don't be shy. Please come up.
Hello, my name is Alicia. I come from Bolivia, and I'm studying also disaster risk management. And what I see here is like in these three pieces of art, it's a world. Like the basis here is a world, and I see every one of us coming from different places, identifying ourselves from some specific places. It's first from the basis of this art. And then like looking at little elements and like having different thoughts from the same picture. So, and now with this exercise, this communication exercise, I think it's kind of a key part of everything, this effective communication, for this learning, for this information exchange, for this networking, the communication here is a key point. So this effective communication of having this idea, having this knowledge, sharing with other people, making the key aspects go up, having these small ideas of how to preserve the preservation idea, how do you make it better, giving some examples to do this. Is this, I think, and all we do, not only here, but whenever we are having pauses and interacting with each other, sharing these ideas, this is one of the key points, and this is like a good instrument to go that. So I have this effective communication for this kind of dynamic environments that we have nowadays here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that that's a really key point. One of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is take these to different parts of the world, because so much of the dialogue globally is in English and is targeted in very academic language and very jargon terms, and yet so many of the practical actions are much more tangible. And you don't need English to be able to understand a lot of these things. It needs some interpretation at times, but you don't need English. And as we go forward, I think I will run one other thing on here, if I can. No, that's fine. I'll just get this. This is how we have been running it behind in many of the situations. Wait while the electronics does its thing. Now, this helps tell the narratives. What I'd like to do is, again, ask people, while they're watching this is just quiet, but it's put in simple words. And it relates to the art, and it's the sorts of things where we can go from the threat to the question of much more of the hope, the idea that our systems will transform, many will remain the same, many of the elements of water flowing in there. It helps you find many of the small images here. While this runs, do we have anybody else who would be willing to come up, share a few thoughts on this? Please do.
My name is Laura Huffman, and I work for the Nature Conservancy in the United States and Texas, where we have experienced a lot of drought in the last few years. And one of the things that the artistic community did in Austin, which reminds me of this, is they used art to communicate with the community about the risks of drought and the effects of drought. And what the artistic community did in Austin was to erect in our river that surrounds the center of downtown a giant tree that was suffering from drought. And as people walked around this waterway every day, they were reminded that we were in a drought. And what that taught us at the Nature Conservancy and other organizations like us is that we can work with the artistic communities to enhance the message that we're trying to send as a science-based organization, and frankly, reach more people. And reach people in terms that don't require them to understand the science of flood or the science of drought, but just appeal to them emotionally. And I think the more that we can pivot into constituencies in different ways, using different mediums, it's really important and necessary, because the problems that we're experiencing require more than just us to care about it. So I commend you for these efforts. I think it's wonderful, and the art is beautiful.
Thank you very much on that. I think, to me, that she mentioned a critical thing here. How many of you reading an IPCC report feel emotional? How many of you in the IPCC debates feel emotional? The battles over where do we put the "the"? Or is it conjunctive or partnership or what? The fine terminology. To me, the question of a vision where we don't have that fear of falling is about a vision that we would want to live in. It is emotional. And so it has to be emotively connected, but also grounded in something that's doable. So one of the attempts in this art is to develop things that connect emotively, but that also illustrate doable, where people can locate themselves. Is there anybody else who would be willing to come up and add something in here? Sir.
My name is Wahid, and I come from the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. I will try to follow on from Deepak and Ravi, but I'm not so articulate, so bear with me a little bit. I'm also, we live in Nepal, and one of the things that we wanted to follow on is how the women and children, they are impacted by the earthquake. And contrary to our deep-seated notion that women and children are the innocent victims of particular situation, we found out that they are actually much more resilient to the main folk, actually. So, but what we think that treating women and children as kind of victims is probably a wrong conversation that we have all the time. So let us try to celebrate the resilience of women and children in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Put it in the wheel. Your idea is, should we put it on in? All of these will come out and then be tweeted further, pushed out. Would anybody else like to come up? I'll do one more if there's interest in one more. Please do. And what I am very pleased about here is that we have had senior scientists come up, former ministers, and students, and people who are engaged across the spectrum. So I think that this is one of the places where I feel the power of this type of approach.
Hello. So my name is Marielle, and I just finished a master's degree at London School of Economics in anthropology and development. And I express myself through, in some ways, at least emotionally, through poetry. And so while I was looking at these, I quickly jotted down a poem. And you can interpret it as you wish. It is very basic. But yeah. The root of resilient speaking, the breathing of whispers that have risen to shouts and maybe laughter, startles that tender being within my water-drenched heart. All the words that form narratives in my mind, the leaves on the trees that are my epistemological thoughts, feel like falling into the grassroots community that embraces change.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Yeah, put it in. Thank you, thank you. Now, as we get closer to the end of this, what I'd like to do is invite everybody to come up and actually directly take a look. The microphone is here, so if you have an idea, please put it in. But I'd like people to actually come up, get up, come and take a look at these closely enough to be able to see what's going on. Because one of the limitations of this form, we can always put things up above, but there's the tangibility, the sense of what they are. And that is where we have seen a lot of people actually become inspired, thinking about very practical things, thinking about the vision they want. So please come up, those of you who can. Come and take a look at the ones here on the stage and other places. Doesn't matter which role you have in this, but the idea is, please come and take a look, get a sense. The art is ceramics. It's intended to be fragile, but it's also very robust. You have a question.
It's a fantastic tool to take a feedback from the community, but how it is interlinked with the governance decision?
Well, how is this interlinked with the governance decision? It's a fantastic question, actually, getting feedback from the community. I feel a lot of governance decisions are about people feeling empowered. They're not feeling isolated, and they're able to articulate their voices. So, if you put it in many ways, the governments don't move until they feel the heat. It is the question of people's voices often coming up. And if people don't feel that they have ideas and visions, then it's very hard for them to articulate their voice. So I think that there is that basic level. The other level is, in terms of decisions, is people recognizing where different forms of action are relevant. So a governance decision may be at a household level. Do we raise our house? And people being able to see that practically. Or it may be at the question of a community level. Do we get people coming together and meeting together and making a decision on a water? Or it may be, as it is shown in here, do we have the COP? Do we have people coming together globally? So that, to me, is the tie. And a lot of the tie is about that question of inspiring people and making them feel more empowered, less isolated. So, Ravi.
Marcus, I haven't put in mine, so may I?
Absolutely, that is the idea.
And I'd just like to read out, may I?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay.
please.
So, resilience is the triumph of hope over despair. Resilience is a story of everyday heroes, of small events, of spontaneous actions, of faith in a common future, of the possibility of each one of us contributing to the future.
Thank you. I wrote a paper once for the Stockholm Water Week called The Fluid Mosaic. It wasn't it was the World Water Week, actually. And it was talking about the way decisions aggregate rather than come from the top down. And I think that the same philosophy underlies a lot of this. How do you get things to aggregate? Is anybody else inspired on looking at this to add a few comments to say a few things? I think, in terms of the formal presentation, we've pretty much done our thing. Oh, we have a speaker.
Perhaps a shy speaker, but I'll do my best. I guess looking at these wheels and thinking of the vision I see in them, I see a lot of hope for the, I guess I see the strength of hope and vision that causes people to move past their own self-interest and take the 1,000,001 small steps that actually give me hope for the future of our planet and our waters and us as a humanity, Economists like to talk self-interest, but I think that the real hope for our future lies in the kind of actions that people were talking about, youth taking after the earthquake, and the kind of actions that were also taken in Boulder, where, everybody has things to deal with, but people are still willing to move past that to show up for one another and to contribute what they can, whether or not it's easy or immediately beneficial to themselves.
Thank you. Others? Well, we still have 15 minutes. If people would like to come up and just look at these and see what they think, please feel free to do so. We're here to talk about it. And I would like to encourage you. This is a great audience, but we would love to have more people come flow through. These will be on show tomorrow and the next day, and today and tomorrow out in our booth outside. And we'd love to have people come through as they get new ideas, add things in. I have tremendous belief in the power of vision, the power of art to actually emotively connect us to do change. That's a piece that I think is really, really important. I've seen it working tremendously at the community level in city governments as well, at the entrance to conferences and things like that. It is one of the reasons I think that the Stockholm Water Forum provides us with such a beautiful plenary at the beginning, where there's action and art and display. But I would like to see it much more used in ways that connect people to things they can do, where it really inspires. I've seen that with some of the inspirational speaking around here, that it's been done. So please encourage people to come, take a look at it. If you have a time and haven't had a chance, come up and look at them now. But otherwise, I think that closes this session.
And we also want to add that we have several of our publications in the back of the room, so if you'd like to take them with you, please feel free.
Right. And these delve into this question of resilience. It's not all the positive side. It is the question where resilience can make it difficult to change, as well as where resilience adds to what we need. Thank you. If people be wonderful. I don't want to close it and close off voices.
Well, good morning. My name is Engineer Rotimi Agbaminoja from Nigeria. We experienced recently flooding in Nigeria, very destructive in nature. A lot of life we are lost. What I discovered from this art of communication is the resilience of the people living in this area. They're so adapted to it culturally. And even after the destructive nature, they still go back to where they lost their property, lost their life. So I think I'll be able to pass it to my government that we can use the work of art to encourage these people to know that resilient too, you can adapt, but you can also relocate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. Have you written that down? Can we put it in? Yeah. Again, others? I shouldn't have attempted to close so soon. It is your input. Yeah, it's so hugely appreciated. Yes, Deepakji.
You know, this being a conversation, Marcus, I just want to pick up on something you said, that, how many of us get passionate about the, bracketed texts and things like that that go on in IPCC and other things. There's not much, except anger, perhaps there's no other emotion involved, and irritation, okay? Now, what struck me, and this is just a parting sort of a thought I take along and just share with you, which is the whole issue of art and why it is so important that as we begin to define the nature of the challenges before us in the 21st, 22nd centuries, challenges of disasters and mega changes way beyond our control, like climate change and a few other things, it's extremely important that we take the rational part of economic thinkings and cost-benefit analysis and all that goes on all the time, leaving them, keeping them where they are. There's an important need to go beyond to what is wrongly termed the irrational. It's just the rational in a very different plane, the arts. And I was just reminded of the greatest Western philosopher, coming from a very Western tradition of Kant, Hume, Locke, But then the only philosopher who's actually linked and done two things, linked to Eastern philosophies and has provided the best, so far, to my mind, philosophy of art, the philosopher Schopenhauer. And what he has said just struck me as I was watching these pieces of art, is he defines, in a different context but related to art, he defines a skilled marksman as one who can hit a target others cannot. But a genius or an artist hitting a target that others cannot even see. Now, cannot see, that's the key point. Art, what it does, it brings to fore the kind of stuff that you will never see in cost-benefit analysis, but the kind of things that matter, and the kind of things that really inspire people and move them to right action. So I think, this particular session has been very interesting in that we're attempting to bring to fore something that has moved humanity through the ages, but somehow we have kind of downplayed it, perhaps, in our attempt to solve these big problems. And there's a need to bring them back. That's my parting thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. That is precisely in some of the things that we're thinking of, is bringing those things that people cannot even see into the light. And that is what somebody alluded to in the Eye on Asia yesterday, the idea that many of the innovators are things we don't even know are happening, that we can't see, that will transform our future. So it is those types of things, the question of an emotive attachment to a future, but at the same time, a way of surfacing those things we cannot see, but that are actually of fundamental importance. And that is, about a lot of water. I did a lot of work on groundwater. One of the big problems is it was underground. You couldn't see it. So it was one of those things of surfacing precisely one of those things you couldn't see. Anyone else on the last one? Well, thank you so much for the attention and for the being willing to be here and spend time with us while the king is upstairs talking. It is hugely appreciated. And please encourage people to come and take a look at this and realize that it is really profoundly attempting to be a part of catalyzing change. There are the publications in the back for those who are interested, and then these will be available in the booth for looking at. Thank you. And not just looking at, of course, putting your hands in, putting ideas in, sending ideas out. Thank you.